All right, welcome back everybody. So today we're going to talk about the cost. How much money did I spend building this car? So pretty much I sat down a couple days ago and I just crunched the numbers. I came up with a list with every single component, every part, hardware, paint, primer, welding supplies. I even calculated the labor time, the amount of hours I have into this thing. It's probably pretty accurate. I probably have more hours into it than what I added up here. Mainly because when you're doing something like this, it's like a one-off design. You have to go back and forth and change designs and modify and adjust and all that kind of stuff like that. So I try to get as accurate as possible, just to kind of give you an idea, or if you would take your car to a shop and you would kind of get a rough idea of the amount of time it takes to build something like this. That's why you don't see so many of these things on Air Ride. And then my design that I made for this, obviously it's not a bolt-in setup. If you've been following the series, this design is made and designed to get this thing completely as low as physically possible. There's probably not a lower one out there on Air Ride, mainly because of my design that I went with. The floorboards are laying on the ground. It's kind of hard to tell from this picture here, but it's completely laid out as low as you can go for the most part. So anybody just tuning in, this is a 1985 C4 Corvette. We are going to do a walk around, mainly just to show people the setup that I have. I'll pop the wheels off. We'll look at my Air Ride suspension setup, just to give people some better idea of what's going on with the car if you haven't been following the series at all. So let's just get ahead, look at the car real quick, and then we'll run down this list. All right, starting with the front, there is the top mount that is welded to the chassis. Certain areas were notched out to make that fit in there. And the main thing is this control arm. This bracket is piggybacked onto the factory lower control arm and actually lowers the air spring down roughly 2 inches to be able to get the front end as low as it is. And then there's custom bolt-in sway bar link for factory sway bar. And then that's where our air lines ran to the back of the car. But you can see that. And then everything is QA1 18-way adjustable shocks. And that has a custom design too, as you can see. That's actually part of the lower control arm bracket. There's a bolt that runs through the bottom of that, which sandwiches the plates together, and that is the lower shock mount there. Moving on to the rear, there is the top air spring mount, which bolts onto the differential mount there. That is modified to accommodate that, which allows you to mount the air spring close in here. Although this does look like this is touching, it's just because the suspension's hanging down all the way. And that mounts to this custom lower strut rod bar, which eliminates any kind of where the factory spring would go. So there's nothing there for that. And then this bolt on piece is an extra support on that. And then there is the shock, which is a custom bracket to hang it lower, just to be able to get the suspension all the way up. And you can see there's no bumps out there. So for air management, I'm running Airlift Performance 3P system with 3/8 lines. And that is on a custom trunk mount or hatch mount that was made, and twin Bayer 440C compressors and a 4-gallon tank. which has external tank drain that hangs underneath the car. All right, so here we go. So I'll start off with the main components. Airlift performance, $1,800 for the 3P 3/8 kit with dual compressor line. Dual via air compressors, $340 for both of those. $115 for the air tank. Airbags were $165 for all four. Fittings, roughly $25 for those. My QA1 shocks, $680. So you don't have to go that route. You can just use a regular shock as long as it has the range that you need to make your up and downward motions happen. You could kind of pick anything. I just chose to go with them. A, I like their stuff. B, I kind of wanted more of like a performance air ride setup, so I did go down that road and get those. Front sway bar links, $95. Rear heim joints for the toe link that I made. I had to order those, they were around $25, and the tool I think was around $20 just to tap those on each end. So you had the rear bolts that hang the spring. They were custom ordered, they were like 12 inches. That was like $25. The weld-on bushings, the polyurethane bushings for the rear strut arms that I made, they were $45 for four of those. Clamps for the line, $11. $40 for primer, $40 for paint. Airbag brackets for the top. I used all four of these ones that are like CNC cut with the holes for the fitting and stuff like that. They're just really nice and kind of cheap for four of them. I mean, it's like pretty much a little over $10 for each bracket, and it would take you like so much longer to actually make them, drill out the holes and make them that nice. So four of those, and I cut them down to fit. I used two round airbag brackets for my front control arm. Same concept, they're dirt cheap. It was like $25 for like a 4-pack. 3/16 thick, they're really nice. So I ended up having to get shock sleeves for $10. So they were like T-bar shocks. I had to get rid of the T-bar and just use like an eyelet setup. So I had to buy a pack of those, and that was around $10. I estimated around $40 for hardware. Grade 8 stuff. It's probably a little more than that, but I think that's probably what I actually use for everything, because I ended up having to buy some special stuff here and there. Top bag mount bolts, which is another thing I had to get metric. They holds a differential in there. I had to get a metric bolt for they were like $12 for those. Welding supplies, roughly $120. I use like a tank and a half gas, and then a roll and a half roughly, a wire. So around $120 for that. I came up with around like $175 for something you probably don't need here. I bought a set of control arms from a junkyard and rear strut rods from a junkyard, mainly to make my jigs. So I got those so I could mock everything up before I took my car apart and took it off the road. So that was around $175 for 2 lower control arms, 2 rear strut rods, which I still have, but kind of unnecessary if you had the time and you want to take your car apart and use those pieces to make your stuff. So the grand total for all those components, $3,880. So roughly around $4,000 for everything. Give or take, you can change a couple things here and there, but all those little things, there's probably a couple little things I'm missing, like I said. That's that. So there was one more thing too that I had, which is essential, was the actual metal I used to make everything. So the front was $110 with the metal. The rear was $165 with the metal. The rear arms, I custom ordered those through a vendor online, and then I had to order those top plates. I had them specially cut just for time purposes. They're like 4x8 rectangles, 3/16 steel. They were like $80 alone just to have someone cut those, and I ordered them from a local metal shop around me. So that was $275 just for the metal that I had to buy. I have a little bit left over, but not much, but that was pretty much everything that I needed there. So now I'm gonna go into hours. So I'm starting with the front here. So I estimated around 6 hours to do the top mount for the bag. I had to notch the chassis, reinforce that, weld it on, paint it, all that kind of stuff like that. So 6 hours for that. The lower control arms, both sides, those top and bottom brackets that are sandwiched together and then welded on. I roughly estimate around 8 hours for those, 4 on each side. Probably was more, like I said, but I figured you do it again for a second time, it's going to take you not as long because you know what you're doing. So 8 hours there. Shock mounts, both sides, just the design to get that set up, making them fit correctly, around 4 hours for that. Sway bar link brackets, roughly 2 hours. Just to, you know, making them wasn't really the hard part, but was to like get the right hardware and measure everything to get that to fit with the factory sway bar and clear everything. From that came our new sway bar links that we sell. If you are interested in them, they're in the description of any of our videos. So that was about 2 hours for that. And then I kind of came up with like a 4 hour miscellaneous window of hours for little things. So that was a grand total about 24 hours worth of labor just for the front alone. Now to the rear, the strut rods that I made with the jigs, those weld-on bushings, the top mounts, all that was probably like the biggest part to make back there, the biggest component. That was around 8 hours, 4 per side that I estimated. Top mounts, 6 hours. I end up notching the frame to get those to fit in there to clear the axle so the head of the bolt doesn't hit the axle from going up and down, or half shaft. About 3 hours for the toe link. I ended up taking that down, cutting them down, re-tapping each side, and then 4 hours for the toe link mounts. They are those things hanging on the knuckle that lower it down. That actually probably took me way longer because the way I had to dial that in to fit just right and snug on there, and just to allow the right clearance for upward travel, not to hit the frame and also not to hit the airbag. Like when you fully extend it, it hits it, but at ride height, even extended or lowered, it comes nowhere near it. That took me a long time to get that right because it's just so tight back there, and my design having that air spring where it is, it's just really, really close back there. So I have a lot of time into that, just setting that up. Which is one thing, if you went to like a traditional airbag where it doesn't go down all the way, you don't really have to worry about that at all. So we came up with 5 hours for that extra bracket I ended up doing a couple videos ago, just to keep the air spring from like tilting backwards. I ended up having to take those back off, grind the paint off, weld everything, prime it, paint it. So I said about 5 hours for those. Jig setup, just making the jigs, you know, getting that all dialed in, front control arm set up, just mainly like kind of a little bit of planning for that stuff. 2 hours of labor time there. And I did another 4 hours of miscellaneous, just little stuff, you know, to get ready, grinding, cutting, all that kind of stuff. Then 4 hours for plumbing, 4 hours for the trunk mount, and then about 4 hours for wiring. So that's a grand total of about 32 hours, a total of 68 hours total. So what I did was I looked at a couple fab shops that do stuff, and the labor rates changed anywhere from 70 to 100. So I just kind of picked a number. I said $80 just to get a ballpark. If you would take your car to a shop and say you want something like this done, that would come up to $5,440 worth of labor time. Shops would probably charge you more and longer for that, just because I was trying to be as efficient as possible. So 5,000, call it 6,000, somewhere in that range worth of labor time if you would take it. But if you're doing it yourself, obviously you don't have to pay for that. So if you did have to pay for it, the total for everything, parts, components, material, labor, $9,320. So roughly 10 grand if you're not gonna do it yourself, to go take it somewhere and have it done like that low. So that's the numbers. Obviously there are cheaper ways to do it. Different air management, all sorts of different ways you can do it. For me, this is the way I wanted to do it. I wanted it a little bit different. I wanted it extra low. So I took my time and did it the way that I wanted. So if you enjoyed the video, press like, subscribe. Thanks for watching.